Hi, my name's Victor Riffel. I live in Benton, Kansas, which is 9 miles east of Wichita, Kansas. I live here with my wife Tammy, and we're on Stearman Field. It's a residential air park with probably 140, 150 airplanes. I'm living the pilot's dream because my wife lets me fly a lot, and I've got several friends here. It's like being in high school hanging out with my buddy. One of the advantages of living on an air park like here at Stearman Field is that, you know, your airplane's here. If you want to go fly and it's nice out, all you have to do is pull the airplane out and fly. You don't have to drive anywhere. There's always planes going by and you never get tired watching people come in and land. I have a great spot. I'm right across the street from the runway to where you can set out and hangar talk and hangar fly and just enjoy aviation. My airplane is a PT-17 Boeing Stearman. It was built in Wichita, Kansas, and it was a design that Lloyd Stearman had come up with. And this particular airplane was considered the trainer for the pilots. Most of the pilots that were trained in these airplanes, this was the first airplane they ever flew. And if the story kind of goes that if they didn't solo it in 8 hours, somebody else got the chance to fly them and they were washed out and sent back to the front lines. This airplane spent its Army career in South Carolina, built in 1940, and the Army had it in 1940. After the pilots had finished their training in this airplane, they probably would have moved to either a T-6 or a twin-engine airplane to either become a fighter pilot or a bomber pilot. This particular aircraft had been, I think, it had been in Florida for a while, it had been in Texas for a while, and ended up in Michigan. The restoration was done by Air Repair Pete Jones in Cleveland, Mississippi, and that was done, I believe, in 1988. Since I've had it, I really have just maintained it. I haven't really done anything major to it. It's not the type of restoration that is going to win the completely authentic award that the Stearmans would be equivalent to what they were in World War II. One of the differences on mine and some of the other older Stearmans in World War II had stall strips on it. Some of the stuff I have on mine is a smoke system, which is a lot of fun to come in to fly over people and turn your smoke on, or, you know, make passes with smoke on, or even when you're formation flying, smoke just adds a little bit extra to the airplane. Let me go into a little bit more detail on the stall strips. I believe it was the Navy, and I may have that wrong, but the Stearman's a pretty docile stall characteristic airplane that would just kind of buff it and gradually go over into a stall. But with the stall strips, it breaks into a stall real easily, so that the pilots could be a little bit more aggressive in learning stalls and characteristics of the plane. As you can see here, this one's painted, it says U.S. Army PT-17 with a crew weight of 400 pounds. Well, I think during World War II, the pilots were a lot lighter than they are today. It said service with 73 octane or higher, and this airplane I burn 100 low lead. And I'm hoping that the government doesn't do away with the 100 low lead gas, because, you know, most of these older airplanes need that kind of gasoline to fly. On my particular Stearman, the buzz number is 356. This was the number that they could identify in training which guy was in which airplane and things like that. And this particular airplane also, the instructor would sit in the front, the student would be in the back, and you can actually fly this airplane from the front or the back. But if you are soloing it, you always want to sit in the back because of the weight and balance. It does have a baggage compartment that you can keep stuff in, like I usually keep the covers to cover the cockpit and the engines and things like that. It had, you could put 60 pounds of baggage in there along with your 400 pounds of crew weight, and it's just a great little airplane. As you can see, there's a handle here on this side and that side that's a lift point. And as you get down here, got some avionics antennas that probably weren't on the original Stearmans. You've got the cables coming out from the rudders to run the rudder cables, and then flying wires. This airplane has a lot of those. You know, this is something you usually check to make sure they're all tight and everything before you go fly. Lloyd Stearman did a great job of the aerodynamics of keeping everything nice and smooth going out to the end of the airplane. On this particular Stearman, with a lot of them, they had the stencils here tell what the part numbers were and which part it is. The trim tab is right here. The Stearman, it does use trim, but it's an airplane that if you aren't perfectly trim, it's still an easy airplane to fly. And then I have my vanity N number, 23 Victor Romeo, and some of the Stearmans you'll see it says Stearman on it, but a lot of them don't. As we move up to the cockpit, you solo it from the rear, of course, and you know, the stick, you've got your rudder pedals, the trim tabs down here, and then the assortment of gauges. It does have the harness and seat belt. The visibility in this airplane is awful on the ground. That's why when you watch one of these airplanes taxi, you'll kind of see them do S-turns, because you really have hardly any forward visibility in this airplane. And on takeoff, you either learn to look left, right, or some people use a peripheral vision and just kind of look straight forward. But until the tail comes up, you're just trying to keep straight on the runway. And then when you do come in to land, one of the things that some people will just kind of be a nice half circle around to land. That way you can keep the runway in sight. Mainly because when you get down and get the tail down a little bit, your forward visibility is pretty much all gone. This particular airplane, the fuel tank's up here, and you fuel it up here. The easy way is to stand down here on the wing to fuel, take the cap off, and you can reach the tank. But the fun way is to climb up and stand on the front top of the engine and fuel it from the very top. I haven't had a fuel overflow incident, but I did have a learning experience. One of the first times I fueled this plane at the fuel stop coming back, I didn't realize that there was a cap on the end of the fuel nozzle, and when I hit the trigger to start the fuel, I had 100 low lead spread everywhere. 46 gallons of fuel is what the tank holds, and this is the only gas tank on the plane. It is a gravity flow system, so it doesn't have a fuel pump or anything like that. And your gas gauge is right up here in the front, so that when you're flying around, you're constant reminder of what your fuel situation is. And when it gets low, that's all you can see is the little bobber bobbing up and down. And actually the mirror right here was positioned in such a way that the instructor up here could see the student's face, and the student sees the instructor's face, but that's about really all that you can see is the two people in the airplane. It doesn't really show you anything behind the airplane or anything like that. It was positioned in such a way that the instructor and the student could see each other for hand signals, because a lot of these airplanes, when they were training, didn't have radios. If you've watched people do aerobatic shows in the Stearman with the fuel system that it is, sometimes when they're upside down or flying upside down for a little bit of time, since it is a gravity flow system, you will notice the engine sputter and quit until they come back around the other side, and the engine will fire up again. As we come around to the front of the airplane, we're going to look at the landing gear. On this particular airplane, this is a landing gear that's pretty narrow, and so this airplane, as a tail draggers, a lot of them do, it does have a huge ground looping tendency. So this is the type of airplane, at least for my preferences anyway, if you can land on grass anytime, you'll pick it over pavement, because when you're on pavement, and if you're not a little bit straight, the tires will grab and you're going to kind of go that direction. But on like a grass runway, the inertia of the airplane will kind of keep carrying you straight, even if you aren't lined up completely straight. The brake system on this one is redline brakes, which are a disc type brake. The original Stearmans didn't come with these type of brakes, but this is a very reliable, good braking system to use on a Stearman. There's a lot of arguments on the braking system. Some of the people that are the purist or authentic people that they like to leave the old brakes, but some of the brakes, the older brakes they'll lock on one side or the other, and they've just had several problems like that with them. So I'm glad that my particular airplane has this type of system. One of the pre-flights that you would check on this airplane is to make sure that your struts aren't all the way down. That would be an indication that you've lost the hydraulics in the landing gear. As we move to the front here, to the propeller, this particular propeller is an MT propeller. It's a great propeller for me. The best performing one would be the MT steel propeller that I think most of these had originally, but it has a 100-hour AD that you have to address every year, and I think for me this wooden propeller works the best. With the metal propeller, the climb out's usually a little bit better, the speed's usually a little bit better, and it's just a better performing propeller. My particular engine that is on my Stearman is the Continental 220. It was one of the engines that was used by the Army and Navy on the Stearmans, and the other engines they used, one was the Lycoming engine, and some of them even had a Jacobs engine. The Lycoming and the Continental were the predominant engines they used. The nice thing about the Continental engine and even the Lycoming engine as far as a Warbird and the radial engine is that these things don't use that much gas as far as flying around and consumption. So you have a great sounding engine for maybe 10 or 12 gallons an hour of flying. I've flown other airplanes with like say a 172 or something like that, and compared, when you compare the engines or whatever, this one definitely sounds better. The Stearman's one of those airplanes that when you're in it, flying it, it seems like you're really going fast, but if you're standing outside watching it take off, it's really going slow. The Stearman isn't really what I'd call a fast airplane. It cruises at maybe 80, 90 miles an hour. It was designed to be a trainer for pilots. And since it was, a design for training, it's a fully aerobatic airplane if you like doing that, where you can do loops, spins, barrel rolls, all of the basic aerobatics this airplane is capable of doing. The radial engine has a characteristic to leak oil. Unfortunately for me, my engine doesn't leak that much oil. The oil tank has 4 gallons of oil, and it's, like I said, when you fly, when you're done flying, you'll see oil that's been thrown out from the engine. And one of the characteristics of this engine, before you fly it, or even after it's set for several hours, you need to pull the propeller through several times to make sure that none of the cylinders have a hydraulic lock. So for me, the fun of flying, it's great. I don't have to go out and practice touch and goes or anything like that. I just enjoy going out flying. And if more people would, get a little more interested in taking up flying to understand what it's all about, I think they'd have the same enjoyment that I get out of flying. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of exploring my airplane and getting to know a little bit about it.